Page 896, exercise 20-6. Might be one of those not so obvious. 20-6 says, a job cost sheet for our company is given below. So there's a real one. I've been doing a simulated one. So here's the cost ledger. Each one of these individually are called job cost sheets. They're unique and the heart of a job order cost system. And here's one that looks more like real life. Instructions.
Can we just note that it says white lion cages for the product?
I never noticed that. I've been teaching this book 3 years. Did y'all hear what Shane said? Yeah. Look at the product we're producing. White lion cages. For whom?
A zoo, I guess.
Answer the following questions. What are the source documents for direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead assigned to this job? Well, I remember first semester when we used to be a service industry and we became a manufacturing firm, that one of the things we did that week, anybody know how this works? Jake, come to the side for me, please.
Does anyone remember?
I don't.
When we were service
Obviously.
When we were a service industry and we became a manufacturing.
Huh?
When we were a service company and I became a manufacturing.
Thank you. First semester we were a service industry, and then when we started becoming a merchandising concern, we spent some time talking about source documents. We talked about purchase requisitions, purchase orders, and invoices, and credit memos, and debit memos. Even though those are becoming electronic, the theory behind them, the support behind them, the reason for being is still there. We still need evidence in business to support the transactions that we record and that we rely on. Now, this question is formulated, what are the source documents that do so-and-so? So I want you to think about it. I want to name the ones I just named. Purchase, requisition, purchase order, this works. Purchase order is so commonly called a purchase order, nobody calls it a purchase order, it's a PO. Invoice, receiving report, time card, time sheet. I might have to add some more to the list. I'm doing this off the top of my head. Predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. That'll get us started at least. We may have to add some. I'm reading exercise 20-6. A. Answer the following questions. 1. What are the source documents for direct materials? Well, let's think of it this way. We have a flow of cost. Let me ask you, can you all see this, or would I be better off doing this on the document camera on that screen? I can do this over there. Can you tell me at the back of the room? Esther, can you see this well enough?
Yeah.
Can you? Are we doing all right here? I don't like that crooked line. Sorry. What was I going to do here? Oh, yeah. So what the three chapters have in common, job order process and standard cost, is that things start out in raw materials, they go to work in process, they go to finished goods, they wind up in cost of goods sold someday. This is what we learn to call the flow of cost through the accounts. You're supposed to be familiar with it. Does it look familiar? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. So I'm trying to put some symbols, some visual representation of the question that the book's asking. What are the source documents for materials? So you're supposed to know the journal entry is debit raw materials, credit accounts payable. That's the obvious. What's not so obvious is what's the paperwork that supports that. It's on this list. Which document is the basis for recording this entry? Debit raw materials, credit accounts payable based on what? Jake?
Invoice.
Tucker?
Purchase requisition?
Somebody?
Purchase request, I meant to say.
Purchase requisition.
Yeah.
It's called a purchase
Okay.
requisition. Somebody? Wit?
PO.
Purchase order.
Yes.
Somebody? It's okay not to know. Shane?
All of the above?
Did you read my mind? Jonathan? Your hand was up.
All the above.
Oh, you just picked that because of what I said, not what he said. Well, first of all, I want to talk about invoice and receiving report. What's a receiving report? I don't think that one's ever made the list before. I don't think we've ever had this discussion. Let me prime the pump. Who prepares the invoice?
Secretary?
Jake?
The seller.
The seller. Who prepares the receiving report?
The buyer.
The buyer. We might have a system where we don't give the employees on the dock a copy of the invoice. We don't let them see it. Because we know human nature would be, if you look on that invoice and you see there are 1,000 units, you might go, yep, that's 1,000, all right. And initial it and send it on. Sometimes we give them what's called a blind copy, no numbers on it. A receiving report that they would have to fill out from scratch. And what if they count how many came in and 900 came in? And a copy of the invoice goes to the accounting department and a copy of the receiving report goes to the accounting department. And somebody in the accounting department says, they say they shipped us 1,000, but we only got 900. How many are you going to pay for? Did you hear the question I just asked? It wasn't rhetorical.
900.
How many are you going to pay for?
900.
I don't want to pay for 1,000 just because they say they sent me 1,000. I'm going to call them on the phone. I'm going to say, what's the deal here? I'm going to say, are you sure? I'm going to try to reconcile this before I make the payment. All of that conversation boils down to, which do you trust more? Who do you trust more? Whom do you trust more? There it is. The seller or your own employees right there on the dock? Now the textbook answer is not receiving report. They don't cover it. They don't mention it. That's a real life lesson that wasn't so obvious. Okay? But I think by the time we get to at least this stage, and perhaps this stage, if we've got that kind of system, we would have all the other things stapled to it. I like Shane's answer. It's really all of these things together. The others are not the primary movers. I can't do it with just that. I can't do it with just that. These are internal documents from our company. We don't have a deal until we got a response from them. It's at least an invoice. And in a better system, a receiving report. So I'm going to say the source document for this is an invoice or a receiving report. Let's see if we've got any book answers over here that we could relate to. I just bought them. We're just barely getting started. So these goods go from raw materials to work in process based on what authority? In some of my discussions, you might have seen me demonstrate this is the manufacturing area, that room next door is the storage area, and we pretended there were doors between it that had two big round holes, and scarred up stainless steel on either side and hinges that let it flop both directions. Anybody remember that story? Yes?
Yes.
Well, if you imagine that you go into the storage area with your cart and start taking things down off the shelf to get you a big cartload to take back into manufacturing to get to work, how pleasant is this experience going to be?
Not very.
Can y'all just go help yourself to the goods over in the storage area anytime you want to?
No.
Isn't somebody in charge over there? Hello?
Yes.
Isn't somebody in charge over there?
Yes.
And aren't they pretty protective about their turf? Do they appreciate you coming and helping yourself to goods? Y'all aren't getting, I'm not getting through to you. You're not responding to me. Come on, you gotta help me out here. Can we just go in and take anything we want to off the shelf anytime we want to? No, somebody's in charge. And they have responsibilities too. And you've got to have proper paperwork to give them to allow them to release their goods into your authority. What's the name of that document? Oops, it's not on the list. You want to name it? It's not on this list. Let me give you a hint. What exercise did we work a minute ago? 20-2? Turn to 20-2. Look in the indented information. There are 3 columns. The left column is called job number. The right column is called labor time tickets. What's the middle column called? Materials requisition slips. Does that sound like a good term right now?
Yes.
Read the instructions. Prepare summary journal entries to record 1. Say it out loud. The requisition slips. Oops, I should have put materials requisition on this list. I'm so sorry I didn't. The materials requisition is the source document that allows the supervisor in the storage area to let it go and places the responsibility in the supervisor in the factory. The same piece of paper, the materials requisition slip, allows one person to let go and gives the other person the authority and the responsibility for those goods. We answered the book's question. The source document for materials is the materials requisition. I'm doing exercise 20-6, I think, that says, what are the source documents for direct labor? Well, it seems to me that these two are about labor. Do you have a clue what the difference would be between a time card and a time sheet? And if you do, would you be willing to address them? Maybe just one of them. What's either, Jonathan?
The time card would have your individual time for clocking in and clocking out on it.
Contrasted with?
Time sheet would probably have the entire companies or departments.
I like half your answer. Jeff, was your hand up?
Yeah. I was going to say the time card's for individuals and time sheet is the summary of all that.
Even though we're going electronic for everything, I've seen employees at fast food restaurants arrive on the job and go to the cash register and clock in on the touch screen. I know employees here come in one of the various doors to this building and use their ID card to swipe in. You're aware of that, yes?
Yes.
But are you too young to imagine a punch card where in a factory there was a clock, a machine, and a rack right next to it with one card for every employee in the factory? And when you arrived to work that day, you found your name in the rack and chose your card and punched it, put it in a little slot, and it kind of snapped at you. And you pulled it back out and walked on in and put it in the rack on the other side. And when you got there, got through with your job that afternoon, you found your card in that rack and you pulled it out and stuck it in that slot again, and it kind of snapped at you, and you put it over here, and you repeated the process every day. What was that thing?
Time card.
That's a time card. What's the purpose of a time card? But to find total hours worked, the basis for payroll. Agree? That's how much your check's going to be for. What you clock in and clock out. Everybody in the room probably knows that. Now, a timesheet's kind of unique and different to this stuff that we're talking about now. If we're talking about job order cost accounting, if these costs can be traced to the jobs, if we want to allocate these costs to jobs uniquely, then don't we have to have some way of communicating with the accounting department that we worked on several different jobs during the day? Maybe it's post-it notes. Maybe it's a formalized sheet of paper. Some way, somehow, I need to be able to say, I worked on job 429 2 hours today. I worked on job 430 3.5 hours today. And I worked on job 431 a half hour. Are y'all with me?
Yeah.
So I accumulate that information and turn it into the accounting department. And in the last exercise that we just worked, we saw and allocated those costs to production based on something. What must it have been based on? Say it. Time cards or time sheets?
Time sheet.
Time sheets. Time sheets help us trace the work to the particular job on which it was expended. Do you get the idea?
Yes.
So as we begin to accumulate the elements of cost in work in process, the materials costs are based on the materials requisition. The labor costs are based on timesheets. How am I doing? Getting through to the not so obvious? How about source documents for manufacturing overhead? How does the cost of manufacturing overhead get into work in process? Is it on the list on the marker board? And if it is, would you address it with me? Jeff?
Predetermined manufacturing overhead rate?
We've chosen to use an overhead rate to apply overhead costs to production because of the unique characteristics of manufacturing overhead. We assign actual costs for materials, actual costs for labor, but this is an estimate that we use, and there's a whole big 2-hour discussion that we ought to do about manufacturing overhead alone. But it is the overhead rate. Predetermined manufacturing overhead rate that we use to assign those costs to production. That's a long story that we ought to get into in a minute. And maybe we'll sort of get there in this exercise. Let's keep reading. 2. What is the overhead rate in this problem? Well, we're going to get there too. But you know what's funny about this, Jake? I was standing here in the last 30 seconds regretting that I had erased that other thing. And it's on the other side. We're not going to put it. But I wanted to gesture to it a second ago, and I thought it was gone. And now I'm contemplating erasing this, and I don't have another side to flip it to. Could we have a triangular thing? I know. Let's talk a little bit about manufacturing overhead and things that you need to know about manufacturing overhead. How does it work? Why do we do it the way we do it? Maybe I ought to show you the answers we've determined already. So the questions we've answered already are: the materials is based on the materials requisition slips. The labor is based on time tickets or time sheet, I called it there. Wish I had called it time tickets to be consistent with the book's term. Same thing. Time cards, punch in, punch out, the basis for total payroll. Time tickets, time sheets, allocate the cost in the factory during the day for the work you expended. Overhead, this predetermined overhead rate idea. I want to talk a little bit about predetermined overhead rate. So here's how it works. We're going to say this is a year. And what we'd like to know is the total cost of the goods we produce during that year. The materials cost and the labor cost, we found good ways to allocate. One alternative would be actual cost at the end of the year. It'd really be accurate, but it wouldn't be helpful all year long. We'd be running this business blind, not knowing information. We just simply can't wait till the end. One alternative would be to allocate actual cost on a month-to-month basis. The property tax bill arrives this month, then this month's production has property taxes in it. 2 months from now, insurance bill arrives. Those goods have insurance in them. No property taxes, but boy, they've got insurance. Now, doing it that way is going to cause the unit cost to fluctuate severely and therefore not be comparable. What we'd like to do is do something consistent that we would get comparable results that we could use for decision purposes. Waiting until the end of the year is not a good idea. Allocating actual cost on a month-to-month basis is not a good idea. Those property taxes ought to go in every product that we produce. That insurance ought to go in every product that we produce. The rent needs to go... No, that's not a good example. Sorry. So, what we're going to do is, at the beginning of the year, come up with an estimate. And use that estimate to come up with a rate. Take an estimate of the total overhead for the whole year. And divide that estimate by some, well, I'm going to back up, by something. We could divide by 12. We could take this estimate of overhead for the whole year and divide by 12 and put the same amount in every month. That would seem like a really good idea and would work under one circumstance I can think of. When would dividing by 12 be a good idea? Shane?
Production is always constant.
If you produce the same amount every month, this would be a great way to do it. What are the chances that you're going to produce the same thing every month? Speak.
0.
Small. Very small. I'm just guessing too. I don't know what we're producing. We've made no assumptions. It just seems to me that production would vary some. Okay, we're a toy manufacturer. Are we going to produce the same thing every month? How much are we going to produce in January? Hello? Hardly any at all. How much are we going to produce in August? Cranking it up, aren't we? September. More than August? October. It may be too late now. We may have been shipping them already. But do you see my point? A toy manufacturer is not going to produce the same amount every month. Their production is going to vary significantly over the year. Now, dividing by 12 is not a good idea. But dividing by an activity is a really good idea. If you can pick an activity that will vary as production varies. We've been introduced to 3 possibilities. We could divide by, you name them, something that will change directly in proportion to output. Shane, name one.
Direct labor.
Labor hours. Whit, name one.
Materials.
Materials. Vary directly in proportion to production, I'll agree. But why don't we ever use materials? Why is that a wrong answer? I know it's a wrong answer. I just can't think of why it's wrong right this minute. Let me come back to that. It's not materials. Jeff?
Machine hours used?
Machine hours. And the other one related to what Shane said, I made it into an answer that I'm sorry I made it into. Something about direct labor.
Labor costs.
Direct labor dollars, direct labor hours, and machine hours are all really, really good ways to do this. Direct labor dollars, direct labor hours, and machine hours. And I don't know why materials aren't right this minute. I still don't. That's not a very good thing. Direct labor dollars, direct labor hours, and machine hours. Now, if you think about it, if you produce 1,000 units this month and 2,000 units next month, your employees are going to work twice as much. Agreed? Agreed?
Yes.
If you produce 2,000 units this month and 4,000 units next month, the machine is going to run twice as long.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
These are all things that vary directly into production. One of your homework problems, you used each of these activity bases, we call them, activity drivers, and experienced all of them at some point during your homework. Now, which was the one you saw the most? Which was the one you saw the most?